He was confused by life as he saw it. He was frightened by it. He couldn't understand why things happened the way they did. And somehow he realized that until he personally resolved that matter for himself, he was not good either to himself or his family or anyone else. And the truth of the matter is that in a nation where nearly 62% of all relationships fail, we need to be considering what the Buddha thought when he said, "I'm no good to anyone. My mother, my father, my wife, my son, the kingdom, until I resolve these issues in myself." And this seems to be a big problem for people. And I think it's because we're not asking the right questions. And when the monks got together and said, "Roshi, we need to get a book from you," the truth of the matter is that I didn't write this book. This is a collection of my teachings over the years that they took and recorded and transcribed into a book for me. So when people ask me, when people say, "This great book, Roshi, wonderful book," I tell them, "I'm glad you think so. I've never read it." Tell me about it. And I think it's a great book not because of what's in here, but because of what's in there. Because I think, if anything, it makes people ask what I say is the most important question. So who are you? Why are you here? Why were you born? And when I was a very young kid, I was a volunteer fireman in the township I lived in. And the story is misrepresented in the book on how I came upon the acorn realization. And we were fighting a big fire in the Pinelands one day that went on for a whole week. And this was my very first fire that I participated in fighting. And as we were standing in the middle of this fire at about 9 o'clock at night, coming at it, we had the job of creating a border to try to stop it from jumping over. And all of a sudden it sounded like it was going to rain. And it sounded like it was raining suddenly. And I yelled back to the senior fireman who had been a fireman all his life, and this life and past lives, I think. "You know, it's raining." He said, "It's not raining. Be quiet. Just pay attention." And when we went back to the firehouse later on, he told me something which blew me away and changed my life forever. He said, "What I mistaken as rain was something that the pine trees naturally do whenever there's a disaster like a fire. And what they do is that when the fire was approaching, they began to drop their seeds out of the pine cones naturally. The tree knew that it was about to be consumed by the fire, and before it died, it dropped the seeds so that somewhere down the line, new pine trees would grow again. But it naturally knew that. So with all of that going on in my life and the questions that the Buddha had and everything, it came to me, and this has been my message for 35 years, that the meaning of life is to live your life, is to be who you are, and not who someone suggests you should be. Sister Maria Conchetta was upset because I should have picked maybe John F. Kennedy, or I should have picked someone else who certainly inspired me as a young man. But when I said me, she was confused because she didn't understand how a Catholic soldier could be so smart, I guess, or so smart-alecky, I guess, more likely, to answer in such a way. So I've always considered the probability that life would really work on this planet if everybody got about the business of discovering who they really were and were that person in their life. So I always ask my students, what would your life be like if suddenly you became absolutely, without compromise from this day forward, authentic? You began to live your life exactly as you. You began to pursue that dream you gave up somewhere early on in your life to become whatever it is you became. And the truth is, whether we like to hear it or not, as we go through life, as Shakespeare Buddha suggested, wearing all of these personas, becoming all of these different characters on the stage. And no matter how our character may be filled with sound and fury occasionally, in the big picture, he said, it doesn't mean anything. It has nothing to do with anything. So again, as a young Catholic, I read a book written by a monk called Thomas Merton. When I got to chapter 6 of this particular book, this first line jumped out at me. He said, "The tree gives glory to God by being the tree." And again, I realized at that time in my life that the most important thing I had to offer God, the most important thing I had to offer life, was myself. So I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about me, and I made a promise that I was never, ever, ever going to sell out. I was never, ever, ever going to be anything but that. And it hasn't been easy. As I tell people, our society and our culture is not conducive for happiness and well-being. If everybody were to suddenly become who they truly are and live accordingly, world economies would collapse, because they depend on you believing you need more, you need better, and you need different. I mean, you just take a look at the culture we live in. The culture is constantly throwing at us new and improved, more, better. And if suddenly you decided that you were just perfect and complete, as the Buddha suggested 2,500 years ago, just as you are, that the person born was like this acorn, inherent with potential that is infinite and profound, if we would only learn how to truly live authentically and on purpose. So the first part of my message in the book is the most important contribution you have to make is you. And the second most important contribution you have to make has to do with your purpose in life. And it was those pine trees that taught me that. The purpose in life is to benefit the rest of the world. So how do you do that? Like the pine tree, by being you. Pine trees in Chemung, New Jersey don't try to be oak trees, and the oak trees don't try to be pine trees. And as I tell people, I've never seen a schizophrenic deer or a neurotic squirrel that when the snow comes, and our monastery, if you come out to see it, it's a very unique building that was built by a guy by the name of Malcolm Wells in 1974. And he was into the whole eco movement back then. And so when it snows, it's a metal roof, and it's tilted in such a way that if we get 3 feet of snow on the ground, we get 6 feet of snow, because it just all comes off the roof and what have you. And I tell people that when that happens, we go outside and you see these chipmunks just getting their nuts and moving over to this side of the field, but you see people panicking and running all around and fretting that they're never going to be able to live again. And you know, they watch Action News the night before to find out what they can do. So human beings seem to be the only one with the lack, if you will, of knowledge that they possess this unlimited potential to meet any circumstance and any situation. So one of the words I redefined early on in my life was the word freedom, because I'm also a Vietnam vet and has had the experience of, you know, that whole patriot issue, and was confronted with that whole concept of freedom early on at the age of 18. And later on I redefined it for myself. And in this country,